Hi and welcome to another Comics and Lit study video. Today we're going to be analysing 10 essential quotations from Shakespeare's Macbeth to help you enhance your knowledge of the play on a deeper level. If Macbeth is an exam subject for you, memorising quotations is a vital part of showing your in-depth understanding of the play, and the following 10 will be a great foundation for your learning. If you want to study alongside this video, I recommend you get yourself a stack of blank cards, and as we cover each key quotation, make yourself a flashcard for each quote as a study tool to help you memorise the information we cover. When designing a flashcard, I would recommend using one side for the quotation, but to make it more engaging, choose 1 or 2 words to blank out, like in this example. On the other side, you can add all the knowledge you want to memorise. Again, I recommend colour coding the information and using little symbols which will aid your memory. For example, on the back of this card, I'm including character, plot, analysis and context. But it's up to you how much or little you include. Okay, let's get started. The quotations we cover today are in chronological order from beginning to end to avoid any confusion. The first essential quote is "Fair is foul, and foul is fair." This line is chanted by the Weird Sisters in Act 1, Scene 1 of the play. They have gathered on a grassland heath to discuss a mysterious meeting with the nobleman Macbeth. To analyse the quote, consider Shakespeare's use of oxymoron, or opposites, in these lines. The words fair and foul oppose each other and create a paradox, which is a statement which seems to contradict itself. Fair, meaning good, is said to be foul, or evil, which creates a sense of confusion and discord to the witches' words. A clue that their intentions for Macbeth are malevolent rather than good. Furthermore, Shakespeare uses a specific poetic metre in the witches' line, called trochaic tetrameter. This simply means 4 pairs of syllables, with the first one stressed and the second unstressed. Daddum, 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 daddum. Shakespeare writes most of the play in iambic pentameter, 10-syllable lines which lead with unstressed syllables, which is said to have the calming rhythm of a heartbeat. By using a more aggressive-sounding trochaic meter for the witches, Shakespeare deliberately sets them apart from the other characters, making the audience suspicious of their strange and supernatural power from the very opening. Contextually, remember that in Jacobean England, witches were feared and hated. People believed they obtained their power from demons, and King James I even wrote a book called Demonology, which sought to both warn and educate people on how witches operated. So by using witches within the opening scene, Shakespeare creates fear and suspense, playing on his audience's fascination with witchcraft. The second essential quote is "But all's too weak for brave Macbeth." Well, he deserves that name. Disdaining fortune with his brandished steel. If you struggle to memorise longer quotes, you can shorten this to "Brave Macbeth, disdaining fortune with his brandished steel." It is spoken by the sergeant in Act 1, Scene 2 of the play. He delivers a report of a great battle to King Duncan, where Captains Macbeth and Banquo overcome the powerful forces of a rebel, MacDonald, and an invasion by King Sweno of Norway. To analyse the quote, consider first how Macbeth is characterised as a brave warrior in the opening of the play. Structurally, this allows Shakespeare to set the stage for Macbeth's tragic downfall. According to the conventions of Shakespearean tragedy, the hero should fall from a position of power or respect. By identifying Macbeth as a brave and virtuous warrior, Shakespeare endears his character to the audience. Additionally, consider the introduction of the theme of fate, where Macbeth is disdaining fortune, which means Macbeth is a character who is prepared to fight against fate itself, which not only presents him as a strong-willed character, but also foreshadows his later attempts to take control of his own future, in spite of the witch's power. This quote also links to medieval expectations of a warrior, and masculine stereotypes of a strong, courageous hero. Macbeth is an archetypal warrior who serves his king and country by killing skillfully on the battlefield. Our next quote is, "'Tis strange, and oftentimes to win us to our harm, the instruments of darkness tell us truths." Here Banquo speaks to Macbeth in private during Act 1, Scene 3. Macbeth has excitedly asked Banquo if he hopes his children will be kings, following the news that Macbeth has been promoted to Thane of Cawdor after the witch's prophecies. Banquo responds with caution, however. We can analyse this moment as a juxtaposition of two ostensibly similar characters' reactions to the supernatural. Both Macbeth and Banquo are thanes, high-ranking nobles. Both are fearsome warriors who fight for their king. However, Shakespeare contrasts their reactions deliberately here, as Banquo's natural suspicion that the witches are the instruments of darkness leads him to question their motives. He is presented as perceptive, recognising that truths may not always lead to light, but sometimes darkness. This juxtaposition conversely presents Macbeth as rash and overambitious, a trait which will see him make increasingly poor choices as the plot develops. For context, consider how Banquo's suspicious reaction to the witches highlights him as a wise and trustworthy character. Shakespeare based the plot of Macbeth on real historical events taken from Holinshed's Chronicles. In these accounts, Banquo is a fellow conspirator in the murder of the king, but Shakespeare amended Banquo's character as James I, now King of England and Scotland, was a descendant of the historical Banquo. Therefore, he cleverly pays homage to his king and patron by characterising Banquo as a godly man. The fourth quote to consider is, "Stars, hide your fires. Let not light see my black and deep desires." This is spoken by Macbeth immediately after he discovers that Duncan will pass the crown to his son Malcolm, thus removing any possibility that Macbeth can become king without taking action himself. Macbeth steps away from the other characters and begins to plot, then checks himself as he realises his black intentions. We can analyse this quote through the dramatic technique of an aside. Shakespeare notes in his stage directions that Macbeth makes an aside, meaning he speaks his private thoughts to the audience without other characters on stage being aware. This technique creates an atmosphere of suspicion around Macbeth's motives, since he already appears to be considering in private the murder of the king and Malcolm. Furthermore, Shakespeare uses imagery of nature, personifying the stars in the heavens to hide their light from him in "Stars, hide your fires," suggesting that he is fully aware his thoughts are treasonous and offensive to the gods. Considering context, Shakespeare uses Macbeth's treasonous thoughts to hold a mirror up to the events of the Gunpowder Plot, which had occurred in 1605, only a year or so before the play was written. This would have created a feverish state of fear and suspicion in Jacobean England, which Shakespeare recreates here to criticise the nature of plotting and treason. Our next quotation is, "Look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it." These words are spoken to Macbeth in Act 1, Scene 5 by Lady Macbeth, following Macbeth's arrival at Inverness in advance of Duncan and his party. Consider the symbolism within Lady Macbeth's language. The serpent, of course, is a reference to Satan in the story of Adam and Eve, who tempts Eve to take the apple from the tree of knowledge, and thus brings sin and death into the world. This immediately connects Lady Macbeth to the sinister Weird Sisters through the association with darkness and devilry. By juxtaposing the image of the serpent with an innocent flower, Shakespeare displays Lady Macbeth as a cunning and persuasive character and explores the theme of appearance and reality, as she suggests they should mask their dark desires behind a veil of innocence. In Jacobean England, women were considered to be the weaker sex and had practically no rights or responsibilities when compared with men. It would therefore have been shocking for an audience to see Lady Macbeth taking charge of her husband in this way, and by using an allusion to the biblical story of original sin, Shakespeare suggests that Lady Macbeth, like Eve, is overstepping her place in trying to control her husband. Moving on to our sixth quote. Will all great Neptune's ocean wash this blood clean from my hand? Moving forward into Act 2, Macbeth utters this hopeless plea following his murder of Duncan, which occurs offstage between scenes 1 and 2. Macbeth's horror and guilt at his actions is palpable and again shows a human side to his character, in spite of his treasonous murder. Shakespeare uses a question, indicating Macbeth's desperation and lack of confidence in his action. The reference to Neptune's ocean uses an allusion to the gods to indicate Macbeth's guilt, as he questions if the blood, which symbolises his own guilty conscience, can be cleaned from his hand. He then answers his own question with an emphatic no, reflecting that the king's blood would rather turn the entire sea red, metaphorically suggesting it is impossible for his sin to be wiped clean. To understand Macbeth's guilt fully, we should consider the context of kingship in the Jacobean era. Jacobeans believed in the great chain of being, or a great order of life, where God set out an order for all living things. According to this belief, kings were chosen by God to rule over the rest of humanity and earth. As kings were associated with God, to commit regicide, the murder of a king, would result in the breaking of the natural order. So Macbeth's response recognizes the depth of the crime he has committed, which will result in the disruption of all of nature. Next up is, upon my head they placed a fruitless crown, and put a barren sceptre in my grip. These words are spoken as part of Macbeth's soliloquy in Act 3, Scene 1, just before Macbeth orders the murder of his once trusted and loyal friend Banquo. Since becoming king, Macbeth has become obsessed with the witch's prophecies that Banquo's sons will be kings, and this knowledge leads Macbeth to turn on Banquo in an attempt to once again change his fate. We can analyse this quotation through Shakespeare's use of metaphor and symbols. Macbeth furiously criticises the witches, saying his crown is metaphorically fruitless, meaning it is useless, like a tree which does not bear any fruit. This metaphor suggests Macbeth's ambition has not been satisfied by becoming king, and that he can only be satisfied knowing he can pass the throne on to his future children. Shakespeare also uses the symbol of the sceptre to indicate Macbeth's displeasure at his position, using another metaphor describing the sceptre as barren, which refers to a woman who cannot bear children, thus reiterating his feeling of displeasure. Contextually, we can consider Macbeth's hubris as stemming from his desire to pass his throne on to his future offspring, as a natural desire of all monarchs throughout the history. Shakespeare leaves the idea of Macbeth's children as ambiguous. Lady Macbeth refers to having breastfed a child in an earlier scene, yet since no child is ever seen, it seems likely the child had died. Therefore, Macbeth's anger at Banquo can also be interpreted as a jealous reaction to his own lack of an heir. For our eighth quote, let's look at, what? All my pretty chickens and their dam at one fell swoop? Macduff utters this in disbelief when Ross informs him in the presence of Malcolm that Macbeth has had his wife and children murdered in Act 4, Scene 3. Macduff's character is of course the hero who eventually overcomes Macbeth's evil, and here he is contrasted to Macbeth in his tender response to the loss of his family. Shakespeare uses birds as a motif throughout the play to represent chaos and destruction. Following the murder of Duncan, Lady Macbeth hears the shriek of an owl. Later, an old man describes a towering falcon being unnaturally killed by a mousing owl. Here Shakespeare uses a tender image of pretty chickens to represent the innocence of his wife and children, and Macbeth is the hunting bird who kills them in one fell swoop. This use of metaphor presents Macbeth as a monster, killing innocents, while Macduff is allowed to show his emotions in a sign of his good and noble nature. For context, consider how masculinity is explored within the play. On numerous occasions, characters in the play reference stereotypes of masculinity, such as strength and violence. Just after Macduff responds to the death of his family, Malcolm urges him to dispute it like a man, indicating he should not show his emotions. But Shakespeare seems to indicate that a good man can be both strong and tender in a brief but powerful scene, which is at odds with much of the play's masculine violence. Moving towards the end of the play, our penultimate quote is, "Out, damned spot! Out, I say!" This is exclaimed by Lady Macbeth in her final scene, Act 5, Scene 1, where a doctor and servant observe her sleepwalking, holding a candle, and wailing about the murders of Duncan, Banquo, and Macduff's family. Lady Macbeth feverishly imagines her hands are covered in the blood of Macbeth's victims, but cannot wipe the imagined blood from her hands. Shakespeare deliberately uses the image of Lady Macbeth with blood on her hands to contrast with her earlier claims to Macbeth that a little water clears us of this deed. Through this dramatic shift in character, Shakespeare reveals that guilt cannot truly be suppressed, and it has in fact turned Lady Macbeth to madness. The spot of blood is a symbol of the guilt Lady Macbeth now feels, and through her maniacal and desperate tone, Shakespeare reveals the wages of treason is to lose your humanity and your mind. In this scene, Shakespeare reverts back to the Jacobean stereotype that women were weaker than men. By showing Lady Macbeth's insanity, which precedes her likely suicide, Shakespeare seems to criticise the idea of a woman trying to have power over a man, since the result is shown to be a broken kingdom and a broken mind. A modern audience can perhaps have sympathy for her, though, as in spite of her evil intentions, Lady Macbeth's loss of power and descent into madness speaks of the suffering of women of her time at the hands of powerful men. Our final quote is, "Life's but a walking shadow, signifying nothing." Here I've broken a long extended metaphor about life into one shorter quote to make it easier to memorize. The full section reads, "Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing." This is uttered by Macbeth as a final soliloquy to the audience in Act 5, Scene 5, following the news of Lady Macbeth's death and the knowledge that Malcolm and Macduff's assault on the castle is beginning. Shakespeare uses an extended metaphor about life to explore the impact of violence and treachery. Macbeth compares life to a walking shadow, which draws the reader to recognise that, like a shadow which simply follows wherever it is led, his actions have no real agency or purpose. This is reinforced by the idea of the poor player, or actor, who struts on the stage only to be heard no more, which essentially suggests Macbeth realises he has been led like a shadow or a puppet to commit these evil deeds, manipulated by the weird sisters and fate itself. The soliloquy is nihilistic in tone, expressing the idea that life is pointless, but it is probable that Shakespeare wanted to express that this is the logical outcome of breaking the natural order. As he was writing at a time when treasonous plots seemed to be rife, Shakespeare is careful to show that treason only results in misery and death for the individuals. Therefore, he both reinforces the power of the crown, using the play as a propaganda against the act of regicide, and criticises those who seek to gain power for themselves. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial on my top 10 quotes from Macbeth. Please feel free to add comments to the feed with your own ideas and analysis, and if you'd like to hear more about comics and lit content, like and subscribe to the video.